In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build an awesome 4K gaming PC build for 2025 and beyond, featuring a Ryzen 9800X 3D, a super high-end GPU for top-tier 4K gaming, and a really interesting PC case. It's safe to say that I'm pretty excited for this one. Let's do this. Make your dream PC a reality and enter ASUS's big giveaway with up to $13,000 worth of prizes on offer. Win everything from motherboards and CPUs to RTX 5080 and 5070 GPUs and even great peripherals too. With ASUS, your build will be smarter with AI enhancements, deliver faster performance, enable smoother building experiences with easy PC DIY, and boast sleeker, refined aesthetics. Learn more at the first links in the description below. I'm going to start with the big one and begin by talking about the graphics card. Now, the GPU market right now is currently a little broken. Nvidia and AMD both decided to launch their GPUs when their last-gen cards had pretty much entirely sold out, something we've just not seen them do before. And while Nvidia has released 4 cards with a fairly mixed reception, AMD has launched just 2, but done a bit more positively in the round of public sentiment. Nvidia have got 2 standout cards from their 50 series generation so far, at least for me, the 5080 and 5090. And the first of those is what I'll be using in today's build. It gives you a modest performance uplift over the last generation 4080 Super that it replaces, and does so for an MSRP which is exactly the same. It's actually $200 cheaper at MSRP than the RTX 4080 non-super variant launched for a couple of years ago. Obviously, the current pricing doesn't reflect the MSRP, and while things are starting to get a little better, I'm very aware that in some regions prices are still absolutely crazy. If you're looking for a 5080, one way to try and combat this is to go for a more price-conscious board. This is the ASUS Tough Card, which is always going to be a lot cheaper than the Strix or their new crazy ROG Astral GPU designs, while still giving you all the performance you can expect. Some of the 50 series supply and demand controversy has actually overshadowed what are a couple of really good products. I'm no big fan of the 5070, but the 5080 really isn't too bad. GDDR7 memory, of which you get 16 gigabytes, and you get all of Nvidia's ray tracing and frame generation, which, whether you like it or not, is just better than what AMD have to offer. And this is a card which pulls an even bigger lead against the likes of the 7900 XTX, a card it just looks like AMD aren't going to replace. Now, for a high-end GPU, you of course want a high-end CPU too, and that's where this comes in, the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D. Now, if you remember, back before Christmas when AMD launched this CPU, it too had massive supply and demand problems, and retailers are actually like scalping these themselves and selling them on for crazy prices. Thankfully, we're back to normal now, and the supply of these chips is all good. You get 8 cores and 16 threads, which is more than suitable for gaming. The big kicker is all the L3 cache. You're going to get loads more cache on this CPU than its non-X3D AMD counterparts, and of course any options currently on offer from Intel. One big advantage with this CPU is actually in the form of the motherboards, and in this build I've picked the ROG Strix B850F gaming Wi-Fi. Now, B850 is actually AMD's mid-range chipset, and it might seem weird to use a cheaper chipset in a board with a $1,000 plus GPU and a super high-end $400 or so CPU, but we just don't need the features that X870 brings. This has got plenty of high-speed connectivity and widespread PCI Gen 5 support, and it supports any Ryzen CPU, right from the cheapest 7500F, a budget-oriented Ryzen 5 chip, up to the new monster 9950 X3D. It also kind of matches with the graphics card and gives a little bit of an ASUS theme in that direction. Talking about memory, this is a build, as I say, for gaming, so a 32GB kit is going to be more than enough. This is the G-Skill Trident Z5 Neo RGB. It comes in black, it's 2 16GB DIMMs, and it's got a nice snappy cast latency. For gaming, you want a CL of 36, but ideally a bit lower. 3032 is going to be that little bit more ideal. The SSD in this build I'm quite excited about. This right here is a 2TB Samsung 9100 Pro. Now, this is finally the upgrade or the successor to the Samsung 990 Pro, and brings Samsung's SSD lineup into the realm of Gen 5. 14.7 gigabytes a second in terms of the read, and the writes aren't far behind. You can read our full review and testing of this drive over on GeekaWhat.com in the cards section now. I also want to talk a little bit about the cooler. This is the first of my Antec components in today's build, and it's their Vortex LUM Vortex LUM 360. Now this is a pretty price conscious 360mm AIO, but it's going to give us pretty good performance. Again, we're going to review this over on GeekaWhat.com. Please keep your eyes peeled for that, where you can find a bit more detailed testing. Antec have been on a bit of a roll, in my opinion, recently and released some really exciting components. Now you can see here you've got a fairly chunky water block design, but it looks sleek and pretty nice. You get a 360mm radiator, and included in the box, you do also get some 120mm fans, which actually daisy chain together to help minimize cable management. The only thing Antec could do to improve this really is to pre-mount the fans. We're seeing that more and more often on some of these coolers nowadays, so maybe something to consider. While I'm in the cooler, I am going to have a quick look at the included mounting hardware and just get familiar with how this installs, because I think, despite having done a few Antec builds recently, it's my first Antec CPU cooler in quite a while. This is the included bag of AMD hardware, and it looks like the cooler is actually going to leverage the built-in stock mounting hardware on the motherboard to make life easy, meaning there's just not a lot of prep you need to do at this point. And that brings me nicely on to this, the second Antec component in today's build, the C8 Curve Wood. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a little while, you might have seen I did a build in their C8 Wood, which I thought was a pretty good case. This, however, is a bit more interesting. If the name didn't already give it away, the thing that's special about this case is the curvature on this front panel. Now, if I take the top panel off, which I think is, I want to say is toolless. Yes, it is. And the rear panel too. This is all fully perforated mesh. That's going to help with temperatures, which is always good to see. I should then be able, not quite sure exactly how, to dislodge this curved panel. One screw later, and you just push it away, it slides and then releases. And you can see the curvature on this thing is gorgeous. And it's going to give you a really nice panoramic view into the case. First impressions are really good. The build quality feels nice. And even on this corner where you've got no support, it's really solid. You do get a spare bracket that will allow you to transition from 340mm fans at the bottom to 3 120s. You're going to want those in intake. You're also going to want intake on the side portion of the case here, where you've got room for up to a 360mm rad or 320mm fans. You have what looks to be a similar amount of clearance at the top of the case. That's where I'm going to be putting my radiator today. And then room for up to a 140mm fan at the rear. So loads of options as far as cooling is concerned. And as I say, the whole thing just feels really solid, which means I'm happy to build a gaming PC inside of it. So I'm going to start off by installing the RAM, the SSD, the motherboard, and of course the CPU all into place. It's really amazing what AMD are doing with their X3D lineup, and they're just Ryzen 9000 lineup in general. I remember when it first landed, it had kind of lukewarm reviews because they focus more on efficiency than necessarily raw performance uplift, but the X3D chips have saved it for me. RAM-wise, just going to fill these 2 slots in this build. Obviously don't need to go too overboard for what is only a gaming rig. Of course, if you wanted to do editing, rendering, streaming, maybe jump up to 48 or even 64 gigabytes of RAM. I was just saying how nice this motherboard is actually, and it's really cool, like things like taking the M.2 heatsink off are just so different and clever. Do remember when you're doing this to take off any protective film, a little something like so, especially with these hotter running Gen 5 NVMe's where cooling is a lot more important. And then return the cover back down, and this little clamp, so clever. It's so overkill, but I actually really quite like it. And with that, I think that's everything that needs to be done on the motherboard assembly. The CPU cooler, as mentioned earlier, is just going to bolt onto these plastic brackets that come pre-installed, meaning there's just nothing else left to do other than sliding the motherboard into the case. This case is quite large, so in some respects the motherboard is going to look a little bit small. However, the raised center standoff in the case, once it's aligned, will hold it into place. And Antec actually give you this nice little plastic toolbox so you can easily organize all your motherboard screws. 3 at the top in this build, 3 along the middle, and of course 3 down the bottom to finish things off. Once the board is in, the next step is going to be the cooler. Now, as I say, I've not actually installed this before, so I need to understand how these fans all sort of connect easily. I thought they connected together, but I think they might just connect to one single harness. Either way, it's still not going to be too bad for the cable management side of things. To get those fans nicely lined up. There we are. And then, yep, it is all into one harness rather than into each other, which is still absolutely fine. Just got to get that in. Make sure these connections are nice and snug. If they're not, you're going to know about it because one of your fans isn't going to work. So get those in and then drop all of the screws into place. These are going to go through the fans and into the radiator. And obviously we've got 4 screws on each fan, so 12 in total. thread the fan cable through the back of the case, and then just get the radiator lined up on the top. This case doesn't have a removable top radiator mount, so you do have to install the rad in situ. Personally, I don't have a problem with that, but if you're a first-time builder, this can be marginally a bit more difficult. Then it's just a case of a drop of thermal paste on the CPU. Large grain of rice is about right if it wants to stick. Stick! There we go. Just needed some gentle encouragement. And then the water block is going to go on. I don't quite know. Yeah, probably that orientation I think is going to look pretty good. And then just get it tight with a screwdriver. You just want to make sure that you've got really, really good contact with the CPU, as that's going to have a big impact on the cooling performance of your build in general. That's the only real disadvantage of this like two sort of screw installation type, is sometimes the contact with the actual processor can be a little worse than when you've got a design that screws in all four corners instead. The next step is fans, and these are actually fans which connect together. I've got 6 reverse fans in total, so that's where the fan blades are actually the reverse of what they normally are, which means for an intake config, like at the bottom and on the side, they're going to look quite a bit better. Now, these are Antec's like more premium fans, so I'm quite interested to see how different they are to what we get on the radiator. They look virtually identical, and it looks to me like they click together like that. That was exceptionally simple. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really get any easier than that, does it? And you even get these rather nice end plates just to make the fans look a little bit more clean before the cable itself goes into place. The end we're not going to use for any particular purpose. We're also going to pop an end plate on. Nice and easy, and then you can see once they go into the build, they're going to look really clean. I do need to change the bracket out at the bottom of the case for this smaller 120mm unit, as this is set up as default for 140mm fans, and then install 3 120mm with the same click system and intake on the side of the case. Coming together pretty well. A couple of bits missing: the power supply, the graphics card, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed a 140mm fan for the rear, which I don't have. So I'm going to buy one of those just to give us, but it's mainly aesthetic really. The cooling in this is going to be absolutely fine anyway. And I think next I'm going to do the power supply, the cables and the wiring, and finish off with the GPU before, as I say, then later adding in the final fan. Now, talking of power supply, if I can find it, I've gone for this, the Corsair RM1000X, or their 1000 watt RMX design. Now, this is ATX 3.1, so that's all singing, all dancing. That's the new standard, the PCI Gen 5.1 connector. And inside the box, you will see we get some nice, I would say they're like nylon, but they're still braided. They're still individually sleeved cables, which I personally think looks really good. And of course, our 1000 watt power supply itself. The 5080 and Ryzen 7 9800X 3D are both very efficient, but they're still incredibly powerful components, and as such do need a good degree of cooling. Now, in terms of cables, I'm going to plug in a GPU power connector, which is this little one just here with loads of connections on. I'm also going to plug in the motherboard power cable, which, as you can see here, is formed of 2 parts. So we've got the bottom half of the motherboard and the top half of the motherboard. They terminate into one cable. I'm also going to pop in not just one, but 2 CPU power connectors, so they're going to go down the bottom. So there's the first one and the second one, and I'm also just going to keep my eye out for a SATA power harness as well, of which I think there might be one back in the box just for powering up any RGB fans, RGB fan hubs should we need them. I'm not sure we will, but it's always better to have it, especially for in the future if you swap anything out. Always keep your spare cables safe, as again you might need these if you change any of the components in the build at a later date. And then I'm going to slide the power supply into place, and you can see that's going to sit at the top of the case with plenty of room actually for cable management and keeping all those cables nice and tidy. I'm then going to go ahead and plug in the power to the CPU, which goes up to the top left, the motherboard to the right hand side, and then the front panel cables. So that's the HD audio for the headphone mic combo jack at the bottom left, JFP1 for all the front panel power reset buttons to the bottom right, and then our USB 3 Type A and Type C connectors. The Type A is longer and thinner, the Type C is shorter but a bit more stubby. And then the graphics card. I haven't actually built with the Tough Gaming 5080 just yet. I've built with the new Tough Gaming cooler on the 9070 XT. You can find that build in the cards now. Sort of forgot how heavy this graphics card was for a second there. And inside, oh yes, very awkward box. We have ourselves one absolute chunk of a GPU. Now, if I hover this in, you can see it's going to look pretty damn awesome. It fits really well in this case. It's a nice size, actually. In terms of PCI lanes, I think I need to remove the second and third PCI lanes in today's build. Keep hold of those thumb screws, as obviously you will need those when installing the GPU back into place. And here we go. Slide it in. Bit of pressure. Oh, that is a beauty. And it fits perfectly perfectly within this build. I think the proportions, the space in between the cooler, the space into the fans at the bottom is just all absolutely perfect. Now, it is a heavy GPU, and we don't have an integrated GPU support bracket. However, ASUS do supply this little tough support. Now, I think it maybe won't fit. Oh no, it will. Oh, epic. And this is just gonna go on top of these fans. It's just a friction fit, so just be careful because it will pop out. But when properly balanced and not messed with, does a pretty great job of actually limiting the GPU sag. As I say, just one fan to go into the rear and then all the panels to chuck back on, and we have ourselves one good looking gaming PC. Moving through to take a look at performance, and I of course tested this build at 4K high settings across the board. On your screen now are results from a range of popular titles, all at that top end resolution, apart from Fortnite, which we always test at 1080p competitive settings. And taking a closer look into these results, starting with the likes of Call of Duty's Black Ops 6, actually one of the worst performers as far as frame rate goes, and you're still seeing over 110 FPS on average at 4K high. The 5080 really flexing its muscles here. In a AAA title, brand new game like Marvel's Rivals, we saw a similar kind of frame rate, just shy of 112 FPS at 4K high, and the game, I think, at 4K looks visually incredible. Well, finally, in a easier to run esports title like Apex Legends, again at that top end resolution, we're still seeing not far off 300 FPS. Apex caps out at 300 anyway, so there's no advantage to dropping the res down, as the potential frame rate upside is only in the region of about 15 frames per second. You can find links for all the parts mentioned in today's build down in the description below. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.